Instead of blaming the obvious culprits who are their politicians and their progressive economic ideas, they instead look around and they blame whatever immigration population is on the rise around them. Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics, back with your weekly dose of the Base Politics Show. Don't forget, if you like this episode, you can like, comment, and subscribe. If you're listening on audio, you can head over, leave a 5-star review. You can also share the show with friends. And by the way, I know I don't say this often enough because honestly, I just get laser focused on the content, but Base Politics is a nonprofit, which means if you like the work that we're doing here, if you find it valuable, you can donate and help us do more of it. We would love to create more content. We would love to do higher budget things. We have so many plans and ideas. So if you want to support us, head over to the Base Politics Substack. I'll drop it in the show notes and drop a donation. All right. With that being said, today we're going to talk about something other than American politics. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I could use a little break from what's happening in the U.S. right now. I don't have any really good news to report on. So sometimes what makes you feel good when things aren't going great is to, pay attention to somebody who maybe has it worse than you. Maybe look at a place where things are even more bleak. So we're going to look at the UK today, where they have been rioting for the past couple of weeks. And I think this is interesting because when you think of the Brits, you're going to notice throughout this episode that I have like a little bit of like animosity towards the Brits. I think I'm just like so founding fathers-esque, like I've never really cared for them, but today's episode is going to make you dislike them even more, even if you don't already have that like healthy distrust of a monarchy and like, just natural like distaste for the Brits. So they've been rioting and I'm laughing, I'm kind of sneering at them because when you think of the Brits, you don't really think of like an energetic people who gets out and riots, right? Like they sit there and they sip their tea and like they think they're all fancy and they're, so elite and they're above rioting, but not anymore. They're out in the streets brawling. They're acting like the French, and it's been going on for weeks. And I mean, the whole thing is just a complete hot mess. But the fallout over these riots is starting to trickle into American politics slightly because their government is now targeting U.S. citizens and blaming some of them for these riots. We have to dig in today. I'm going to catch you up first. So here's a summary in case you haven't been paying attention to what happens in Europe like most Americans don't. They spend all day thinking about us, trash talking us on TikTok. Like they are obsessed with Americans. And I constantly just want to say to them, like, we don't think about you at all for the most part. So here's what's happening now.
Now, there's an all-out attack on our freedoms currently being waged by Keir Starmer and this new Labour government. And the riots we've seen over recent weeks are the vehicle for their agenda. Brits are now being rounded up and arrested for things they've posted on social media in a chilling precedent that George Orwell would be proud of. Bernie Spofforth, the 55-year-old woman accused of being the first to post the fake name of the Southport attacker online, well, she received a knock at the door by cops this week and is still being detained tonight. She denies claims that she incited the riots, saying she simply shared previously posted material. And if you attended the riots but simply watched on from the sidelines, well, you're not safe either. A judge this week said anyone who attended the violence, whether they were involved or not, would be refused bail in the courts. So what's clear now is the useful idiots who rioted across Britain, well, they've played right into the hands of this government's chilling agenda, which, by my estimation, is to silence concerns of mass uncontrolled migration by stamping out free speech. Starmer is now targeting people for their online chatterings and sending the police to arrest them. Just listen to the Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson.
And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification arrests and so forth.
Normal, hard-working Brits are being gaslit into believing they're an outlier, a racist, if they're not on board with unidentified fighting-age males rocking up at our southern border week after week. And we're also being made to feel like worries and concerns about the levels of legal migration to Britain and the societal and cultural changes that brings means you're a far-right thug. This whole charade reminds me of COVID so much that the government is now even relaunching a secretive pandemic-era spy agency to monitor social media for those who comment on the riots. And as we saw with the lockstep front pages of our printed press earlier this week, you're being nudged into believing that your fears for the safety of this country are just unfounded hysteria. So thank God for Elon Musk and X, formerly Twitter, the social media platform he spent £40 billion on to save free speech. He might be the richest man in the world, but let's be clear, first of all, Elon Musk is no messiah. He himself was guilty of reposting a fake Telegraph article this week that Sir Keir Starmer was considering detainment camps for rioters. But for all his faults, we wouldn't have even known there were other ethnic groups involved in riots across Britain if it wasn't for Musk and X. Musk has goaded Starmer online, calling him a hypocrite over his alleged two-tier approach to the riots, while also suggesting the PM is overseeing a Soviet-style administration. In response, the highest police officer in the land seemed to bizarrely hint that Mr Musk could be extradited to Britain to explain himself.
From further afield online, we will come after you.
Talk to me about that, because we have seen some high-profile figures whipping up the hatred. You talked about it in there with the officers, in fact, about this being added to by online commentary. I mean, I'm even thinking of the likes of Elon Musk getting involved. What are you considering when it comes to dealing with people who are whipping up this kind of behaviour from behind a keyboard, maybe in a different country?
They want Elon Musk gone, X turned off, and freedom of speech stamped out. Starmer himself has said he's going to look at social media laws in the wake of the riots and even revisit the Online Safety Act.
Okay, that's a lot to digest, and I think it's important to remember that what's actually happening in the UK is an inflationary problem. It is a poverty problem, and this is a cycle that has repeated itself over and over throughout history, where we see certain populations go through economic hardships almost always as a result of really, really dumb government policies. And once they hit those, hard times, they search around and they look around them, and instead of blaming the obvious culprits who are their politicians and their progressive economic ideas, they instead look around and they blame whatever immigration population is on the rise around them, whatever people group they feel is coming up behind them and that they want to push back down the ladder to make sure they can defend their wrong. Secondarily, economic problems are often global, as we've seen with the fallout of COVID. Many, many countries have been struggling for the past couple of years. When you couple that with a lot of the foreign tensions that are happening, it tends to push people out of those countries and into others. So you already have economic hardship. You already have people that are going to naturally tend to blame immigrant populations that are coming into the country around them. You have an influx of immigration, again, due to really dumb government policies. And oftentimes what ends up happening is violence. It is literally like a rinse and repeat of politics. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll give you a number of historical examples. Take, for instance, the Great Depression. You had obviously one of the worst economic hardships our country has ever seen. There was severe unemployment and a lot of economic despair across the U.S., but a lot of this ended up really concentrating in California because desperate people were leaving their homes and migrating to California because they were being promised that this was like the land of plenty, and then they were getting there, and the Californians didn't want them there because they didn't even want other Americans coming in, right? They hated like people from Texas and Oklahoma that were coming there, much less the immigrants that were around there. Everybody was scrapping for any little thing they could get. And so what you saw happen is that Mexican immigrants were seen as taking jobs for Americans in California, and they became the target of widespread resentment. And this resulted in the mass deportation of Mexican Americans, including many of whom were actually U.S. citizens during the 1930s. You can also look at the political climate that led to World War II. You had economic devastation after World War I. Germany was especially feeling that pressure after the Great Depression, and this led to widespread poverty and destitution and high unemployment. And once again, instead of actually blaming their politicians, blaming their government, instead they looked around and they blamed the Jews. Jews were scapegoated by the Germans for their economic troubles, despite the fact that Jews had a long-standing presence in the country. And that scapegoating accumulated in the rise of the Nazi Party and the Holocaust, where millions of Jews were murdered as part of a genocidal campaign justified by economic and racial ideologies. You saw the same thing after the Civil War during the Reconstruction era here in the U.S. South. The Panic of 1873 led to economic depression that exacerbated tensions between different racial and economic groups, and in the South, Economic difficulties were blamed on African Americans who had just gained their freedom and were now seen as competition for jobs. So once again, you see this combination lead to a rise in violence, this time racial violence, including lynchings and the growth of the KKK as white Southerners sought to reassert control over African Americans. You've also seen this before in the UK during the 1970s and 1980s. You had a huge economic downturn in the UK during the 1970s that led to high unemployment and inflation. And you had immigrants from the Commonwealth, particularly those coming from South Asia and the Caribbean at the time, being blamed for the country's economic woes. So once again, you had a lot of racial tension accumulating in events like the 1981 Brixton riot, where racial violence was fueled by economic despair and anti-immigrant sentiment. So yeah, what we're seeing happen in the UK, and many of these tensions are also, I think, being mirrored here in the US, but have not quite escalated to this level, thankfully, is the result of really, really bad economic policies, and we're seeing this cycle start to repeat. And instead of wearing the culpability for their failed ideas, what we see here is left-wing politicians instead trying to blame free speech and social media for what's happening in their country, which is just crazy town. And I want you guys to fully grasp just how insane they are being, okay? This is stuff that you would expect to see in countries like North Korea. Here you have a post on Twitter from the UK government that says, think before you post. And they're quote tweeting a public service announcement, if you will, from the Crown Persecution Service that says, think before you post. Content that incites violence or hatred isn't just harmful, it can be illegal. The CPS takes online violence seriously and will prosecute when the legal test is met. Remind those close to you to share responsibly or face the consequences. Now, they're getting ratioed for this post beyond belief by Americans, but this is, can you imagine the Department of Justice tweeting this to Americans? This is insane. Also, here's a clip from Sky News, where you have the Director of Public Prosecutions of England and Wales warning that sharing online material of the riots could be a criminal offence.
The offence of incitement to racial hatred involves publishing or distributing material which is insulting or abusive, which is intended to or likely to start racial hatred. So if you retweet that, then you're republishing that, and then potentially you're committing that offence. And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification arrests and so forth. So it's a really, really serious. People might think they're not doing anything harmful. They are, and the consequences will be visited upon them.
He literally says they have a dedicated police office force who are scouring social media to look for this material and then follow up with arrest. And to be clear, these are not just empty threats. They actually are going and arresting people, pulling them out of their homes for things they posted online. This is from CBS. They say the head of the police is now threatening extradition and jail time to U.S. citizens for online posts allegedly egging on the violence from afar. A Sky News reporter asked London Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley about posts made by Elon Musk on the topic. Rowley responded, "We will throw the full force of the law at people, and whether you're in this country committing crimes on the street or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you." UK authorities have already arrested their citizens for online activity. For example, a 55-year-old woman was arrested for publishing a written material to stir up racial hatred and false communication. 2 other British men were also arrested for similar social media posts. Prime Minister Keir Starmer previously warned, "I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, whether directly or those whipping up this action online. The government absolutely should arrest and prosecute anyone engaged in political violence, but in times of unrest, governments have a tendency to overreach and to undermine civil liberties like free speech in the name of public safety," explained Aaron Turr with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which you guys know as FIRE because we love them. The article goes on to note that the UK's laws surrounding free speech are different than US laws. Yeah, you could say that. And as you can see already, just from the news stories I've read you, that Elon Musk, who is the left's embodiment of everything they hate, right? Talent, hard work, success, and refusing to bend the knee to their agenda. So he's their top target. He's been their top target, I would say, for a while because they hate free speech, both in the UK and here. These same people that are in power in the UK, they exist here in the country. Many of them are in office, okay? They are trying to do the same things here. They just haven't got as far because, thank God, we have an actual First Amendment that has been enshrined decade after decade thanks to many nonprofits and others who are working in public interest litigation, ensuring that it continues to be enshrined. Okay, it's not just like we had the First Amendment and that's been enough. I want you to understand that the people who fight on the front lines to continue to protect it are essential. And the reason that they have not been able to chip away at it as they have many other rights is because of that very sturdy defense that we have been able to weaponize against the left's attacks. And I want you to hear just how absolutely insane the attacks on Elon Musk and British media are. These two articles I'm about to share are both from The Guardian, which, guys, it just depresses me because The Guardian is where Glenn Greenwald used to work. Glenn Greenwald, who broke the Edward Snowden whistleblowing. Like, The Guardian used to be a pretty good rag on civil liberties, and that is just gone with the wind. The fact that these articles ran in The Guardian makes my stomach sick. This headline says, Elon Musk should face arrest if he incited UK rioters, says ex-Twitter chief. The subheading says, Bruce Daisley calls for beefed up online safety laws and compares tech billionaire to unaccountable oligarchs. So in the reporting, this guy, Bruce Daisley, says Elon Musk should face personal sanctions and even the threat of an arrest warrant if found to be stirring up public disorder on his social media platform. It cannot be right that the billionaire owner of X and other tech executives be allowed to sow discord without personal risk. Bruce Daisley, formerly Twitter's vice president for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, writes in The Guardian. He said the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, should beef up online safety laws and reflect on whether the media regulator, Ofcom, is fit to deal with the blurringly fast actions of the likes of Musk. In my experience, that threat of personal sanction is much more effective on executives than the risk of corporate fines, Daisley writes, arguing such sanctions could impact the jet-setting lifestyles of tech billionaires. Musk's action should be a wake-up call for Starmer's government to quietly legislate to take back control of what we collectively agree is permissible on social media, he argues. Daisley says the question we are presented with is whether we're willing to allow a billionaire oligarch to camp off the UK coastline and take potshots at our society. The idea that a boycott, whether by high-profile users or advertisers, should be our only sanction is clearly not meaningful. He continues, in the short term, Musk and fellow executives should be reminded of their criminal liability for their actions under existing laws. Britain's Online Safety Act 2023 should be beefed up with immediate effort. Referring to X's algorithm, which he said prioritizes Musk's own tweets, he writes, Musk might force his angry tweets to the top of your timeline, but the will of a democratically elected government should mean more than the fury of a tech oligarch, even him. Like, can we just pause to dissect that hot garbage for a second? I need a minute to process. Number one, who collectively agrees on what should be censored and what shouldn't, Bruce? You don't mean collectively, okay? What are you going to do? Are you going to, have the people vote on every single social media post? Or are you going to have them vote on every single individual on social media and who should be removed and who shouldn't? No, you don't mean collectively, which is bogus enough as it is. What you mean is centrally. You mean you want to centrally control what posts get to stand, who gets to exist online, who gets free speech, who doesn't, what narratives get to further, which ones get to be debunked. You want unilateral control. You're a petty little tyrant, and you're also a coward. I just want to note, he's mad at Elon, who he says, allegedly, right? He said that he prioritizes his own tweets. He doesn't work there anymore, so how would he know? But he says he prioritizes his own tweets on a platform that he bought. But to be clear, Bruce Daisley wants to be able to do the exact same thing just through the power of government, right? He doesn't have the relevance or the riches to buy his own platform and prioritize his views. So instead, he wants to use the government to make sure his views rise to the top and others are pushed down. And yet somehow, in his little tiny pea brain, he thinks he has the high moral ground here. It is crazy. And speaking of crazy, The Guardian actually even sunk further from there. They have another headline that says, you know who else should be on trial for the UK's far-right riots? Elon Musk. This is by Jonathan Friedland. I'll make sure to show his picture on the video version of this. In it, he writes, what gave the phenomenon scale where the super sharers, big-name figures with large online followings who act as nodes for the dissemination of lies? Witness the role of Tommy Robinson and Andrew Tate, both of whom amplified the initial bogus claim. Thanks to them, it was seen by millions. These are people capable of making the weather. One individual can create a mass panic. It has become a habit to speak of social media generically, but the core of the problem is more specific. It's Twitter. That's where Robinson has nearly 1 million followers, When he was banned from Twitter and other mainstream platforms, he had to make do with the likes of Telegram, where his reach was more limited. He was in the wilderness. Now that he's back on X, he can find his way into the phones of tens or even hundreds of millions of people at a stroke. And what happens online carries over into the real world, as we saw at the end of last month when Robinson addressed a crowd estimated to be in the tens of thousands. Let's remind ourselves who brought Robinson and a whole slew of far-right agitators back in from the cold, thereby putting X out of step with the likes of YouTube and Facebook. It was Musk, of course. He decided to make X a safe space for racism and hate almost as soon as he bought it. What's the answer to this problem? Ideally, all politicians, journalists, and influencers would defect en masse from X and use somewhere else as the global exchange for instant news and opinion. So far, that's presented a collective action problem. Even governments who loathe X don't want to leave while it remains a central forum. It's clear that schools should be teaching information hygiene so children learn to avoid fake news the way they would avoid poisonous food. For now, though, there needs to be clarity on the nature of the problem. Lies can indeed kill, and though there are, of course, many others, one of the world's most prolific enemies of truth is Elon Musk. He is surely the global far-right's most significant figure, and he holds the world's largest megaphone. As he may put it, a battle to defeat him is now inevitable, and it has to be won. These people just, make you shudder. They are actually violent. That's what's the actual crazy thing to me is they truly believe they're the good guys, and they are, so glaringly the bad guys, and so quickly willing to come in and strip other people of their civil liberties the minute they don't get their way. I detest people like Andrew Tate. I go after that sleazeball all the time on my platform, but I don't want him canceled. I don't want him deplatformed from any social media. That would be easier for me. That would be a lot easier for me, actually, because then I don't have to effectively counter his garbage ideas. Shutting up people you don't like, people you disagree with, that is the easy way forward for a tyrant, but it does not actually get you closer to the truth, and it is no way to structure a peaceful society. Furthermore, it's so funny to me, these people that are like, lies are dangerous, lies get people killed, but you never hear them apply that same mentality to the people on their side who get it wrong all the time. And I do mean all the time, but especially when it comes to very high-stakes situations, even in recent memory, that also got people killed thanks to their lies. Or if they weren't lying, just thanks to their lack of information and the fact that they boldly ran around declaring things that weren't true to be cold, hard facts and trying to censor people who in any way disagreed with them, right? We've seen this here in America very recently. You don't hear these kinds of people saying that we should deplatform the experts who told us we had to shut down schools and cause kids to lose tons of educational time, made domestic violence so much worse, eradicated gains we've been making against world hunger and poverty. Those weren't dangerous lies. That didn't affect people's lives. You don't hear them calling to cancel people who lied about COVID's origins. You don't think that got people killed? Those kinds of lies? What about all the dumb people that said we had to mask or social distance? They've been proven dead ass wrong over and over and over again, and yet I don't hear you calling for the same accountability for them. It's so interesting. I also want you to notice in this article that this pathetic little dweeb of a journalist, I don't even think he deserves that title, he says the ideal answer would be for the market to basically turn on Twitter. But they aren't. Instead, Twitter has continued to grow and thrive because normal, sane people, they like and appreciate free speech. They like and appreciate open debate. They want to be able to get outside their echo chambers, and they have the ability to actually argue for their ideas, for their principles, and win out at the end of the day. They don't need to come in and censor and cancel people. I think it's really interesting that he says there's a battle to defeat Elon now and that they must win. That's actually very scary because I think Elon Musk in this capacity is representative of something much bigger, which is of free speech. He is one of the only known and noteworthy celebrities, billionaires, giants of industry that is meaningfully pushing back on this push that we're seeing from the left and some from the right as well too, okay? I want to be sure to say this, the far left, and they're much worse on this. Their stances on free speech, all of this hate speech and misinformation, they are much worse. But the populist right, many of the people you find in the MAGA populist right, even Trump himself and his attacks on Section 230, they are the same. They don't stand for free speech either. They're just not quite as bad as these people over here. I really do think in this circumstance, They're after you. They are after me. They are after our rights. Elon Musk is just standing in the way because he happens to own a platform they can't control. They control everything else. That's why they hate him so much, because they can come in and say to Facebook or to most other social media platforms, hey, we don't like this narrative. We think this is dangerous. This is a public health or safety concern. You have to shut it down. Elon is the only one they can't control, and so that's why all of their wrath and ire is being directed at him. I know we often use the term Orwellian. We refer to the book 1984 ad nauseum. I don't think that we do that unjustly. I think there is a lot of Orwellian things happening in society right now. But this case, this listicle of things that have happened in the past couple of weeks is truly Orwellian in a way that I don't think I have personally experienced in my life, where things are just like, the story lines up so close. And I know a lot of you probably had to read it in high school, but probably you've forgotten a lot of things. I know, like, we kind of use the overall gist of like the government spying on you and trying to control you. I want to quickly remind you of the plot of 1984, which, by the way, was written by a Britishman, okay? I think he had his thumb on the pulse of his government and society all the way back then, because what's happening right now, and especially these kinds of attacks against Elon Musk for these reasons, are so eerily similar to what we saw happen in 1984. So there's a couple dominant themes I want to remind you of in this seminal work. The first is the concept of newspeak and the control of language. This is a ChatGPT summary. I love talking to ChatGPT, and they agreed with me. This is very 1984. But they wrote, the government's use of language to shape and limit thought is a key theme in 1984. The concept of newspeak relates to how restricting language can restrict freedom of expression, similar to the idea of governments attempting to control or censor dissenting voices like Elon Musk. The second concept they point out is doublethink, which is the act in the story of holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, which could be compared to political narratives that claim inflation is under control despite ongoing price increases, aka like the government continuing to gaslight you. And then thirdly, they bring up the concept of the thought police in the novel, and they say this is the concept of monitoring and punishing thought crime, and it mirrors modern concerns about censorship and the suppression of dissenting opinions, especially when governments or powerful entities try to silence critics. And I think this third point is the one where it's just like so closely tied to what they're going after Elon Musk and others for. They want to be able to control your thoughts. As I wrote in a Newsweek article on this week, if they had the technology to try to control people's thoughts in the UK, I'm pretty sure they'd be trying to use it, because they're basically trying to go ahead and control the outputs of that, right? What comes second from thinking the wrong thing, you say the wrong thing, or you act upon the wrong thing, or you share the wrong thing. They're already trying to nip it as close to the bud as they can. The story 1984 is set in a dystopian future where the world is divided into three superstates. Oceania, where the story takes place, is ruled by the party led by the mysterious Big Brother. The party controls every aspect of life, including thoughts, using propaganda, surveillance, and censorship. The protagonist, Winston Smith, works at the Ministry of Truth, where he rewrites history to align with the party's narrative. Winston secretly despises the party and begins to seek ways to rebel. He starts a forbidden relationship with Julia, a fellow party member, and they meet in secret, dreaming of overthrowing Big Brother. However, they are eventually betrayed by O'Brien, a high-ranking party official whom Winston believed was also against the regime. Winston and Julia are arrested and taken to the Ministry of Love, where they are tortured and brainwashed. Winston undergoes severe psychological manipulation and is forced to confront his worst fears in Room 101. He ultimately betrays Julia, and his resistance is completely broken. By the end of the novel, Winston is released, but he has been fully brainwashed. He now loves Big Brother and has lost all sense of individual thought and rebellion, symbolizing the total victory of the party over the human spirit. The novel's bleak ending underscores the dangers of totalitarianism, the loss of personal freedom, and the terrifying power of a regime that can control even thoughts and beliefs. But like, Elon Musk is basically Winston Smith right now. They want to be able to take him into a room and torture him and brainwash him and send him back out as a little government puppet that worships the state. I love this quote in 1984 that says, if you want to keep a secret, you must also hide it from yourself. That's the kind of environment the UK is creating right now, where people are going to be scared to say their opinions, even to their friends and neighbors and loved ones, because it could get them arrested. And I want to be clear that the UK has certainly never been like a bastion on any civil liberties, and certainly not on free speech. There's a reason we fought a war to get away from these people. And they already have pretty bad laws when it comes to free speech. So the fact that they are pushing for further crackdowns and to like beef up those laws is just super creepy. The Online Safety Act, you've heard many of these officials reference, is super problematic, and it already cracks down pretty hard on social media companies for disinformation, hate speech, and incitement to violence that may appear on their platforms. As it stands, the law basically makes this like super arduous demand that social media platforms actively identify, mitigate, and manage the risk of harm from illegal material that appears on their platforms. Like, I'm sorry, isn't that what we paid the freaking police to do? Do they ever do actually anything to meaningfully clamp down on true crimes? Because I don't really see it here. This is not the job of private businesses. Like, obviously, yes, most of them are going to choose to moderate their content and to remove illegal material as best they can because that is good for business. But to penalize them if they happen to miss something, if something falls through the cracks, is like, it's an impossible task. Not only does that require a tremendous workforce to try to actually enforce, it actually requires like really erring way over here, because whether something's illegal or not, like, these people are not experts in the law. There's a lot of subjectivity to that. I mean, that's even why you have trials, right? People are often charged with things and charged for crimes that end up not being crimes. They get off, they're innocent, they didn't do it. It's like, this is just a crazy ask to make of social media companies. And this is why Europe's economy has no real tech sector to speak of. They have a very regressive, anti-capitalist, heavily regulated, aggressive antitrust sort of infrastructure on top of this overt hostility to free speech. And by the way, I want you to remember that that is the exact same apparatus many Democrats and nationalist MAGA Republicans are trying to export here. Now, the UK wants to take it even a step further and say not only do they have to remove illegal information, now they're supposed to come in and remove anything that might be false and lead to racial tensions or violence, like increasing out in society. That's impossible ask. Most importantly, because what is true and what is false takes time to identify and figure out. And that is really only accomplished, for the most part, through debate, through fact sharing and counter fact sharing, through comparisons. That is not something that any one person is the arbitrator of. There's no like single person you could appoint in the government that just will always know what's true, what's false, and be able to tell these social media companies, you know, you should remove this because it's false, but this is right? And if that person did exist, the last place they would be working is the government. Like, this is not your like standout stars that go to work for the government. So as a whole, this is just, it has nothing to do with truth, it has nothing to do with misinformation. It has to do with an official narrative that they want to enshrine and protect and make sure cannot be debunked. And this is why in the US, we have continued to fight for the First Amendment, for free speech, and we've gotten such amazing legal precedents on this. Not even like 20 years ago, we had a very, very good Supreme Court case actually around this question of lying and spreading false information and when it was illegal or when it was not. And our court has continued to uphold the fact that for the most part, lying is protected constitutional free speech. The court case is known as United States versus Alvarez, and in it they held that some false statements are inevitable if there is to be an open and vigorous expression of views in public and private conversation, expression the First Amendment seeks to guarantee. You cannot have free speech without false information. That is a false premise. And I really, here in America, I want your takeaway to be how important it is for us to continue this fight to protect free speech and not give these crazy people an inch, not an inch on this subject matter here. I want you to remember names like Amy Klobuchar and Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance and Elizabeth Warren and Senator Blumenthal. These are the people who are partnering together all the time, both Democrats and Republicans, to target free speech here. Just a few weeks ago, we had 91 senators, I think, vote to pass the Kids Online Safety Act, which fortunately stopped in the House, but it was a garbage bill. I covered it on the show extensively, that was basically trying to give the government this kind of power over our own social media. And by no means is it an outlier. There are so many bills I can barely keep count flying around Congress right now, trying to get rid of Section 230 or at the very least limit its capacity. We have things like the Safeguarding Against Fraud, Exploitation, Threats, Extremism, and Consumer Harms here that's trying to make online platforms more accountable by narrowing the scope of Section 230. The Justice Against Malicious Algorithms Act, again, that basically gives the government more control over social media and uses Section 230 as like a tool to bludgeon people with if they don't do what they want. You have the Online Freedom and Viewpoint Diversity Act that tries to remove Section 230 for content moderation decisions. Like, all of this is anti-free speech. All of this is trying to make us basically look like the UK right now. These people are enemies of the Constitution and of your basic civil liberties. You also have a lot of other things happening right now around our political apparatus that are trying to move us in that direction and that you need to be on guard against. Things like the FTC trying to beef up their antitrust regime, the successful case they had against Google a couple weeks ago, which I also covered. You have Republican-sponsored bills in states like Texas and Florida trying to give the government control over social media. You have people like DeSantis and Governor Abbott that are standing by this. I don't care where you fall along the political spectrum. If you're not paying attention to what's happening here in the U.S., you need to start now, because it is a very slippery slope, and we could end up where the UK is quite quickly if you don't stand guard. You cannot have a free society. You cannot have free people. You can't actually have a representative government where people can meaningfully interact with it and like plead their case, or even a free market under these kinds of laws. And what we see in society after society after society is that the civil liberties are often the first to go. Usually it's the guns that go first. Brits have been disarmed for a hot minute. It hasn't fixed their violence issues, but they sure took away their guns to defend themselves or fight back against their government. And now you see what's happening with their free speech rights. They are literally in a free fall where their citizens can now be put in prison for things that they say, for not knowing the difference in something that's true or false, for writing things online. And many of those things might end up being true. You know, I mean, that's what we saw during COVID when they were trying to censor many of us who were pushing back on like the official narrative then. We were right. The things we were saying were true. We won on almost every single count, but it took, 3-4 years for that to be proven. It took a while to get all the information we needed to, arguably fight our case and get them to back down. These things don't happen overnight. So that's the craziest part, is these people right now being imprisoned in the UK. They might be saying things that are absolutely true, but just that are not popular or disfavored at the time. But it is very difficult, if not impossible, to fight back when you cannot say unpopular things or hard truths. All I have to say is we already fought a war to escape these people, but now we have got to fight here to make sure that their dumb ideas don't follow us. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Go have a cup of tea, I guess, or maybe just throw some in the harbor if you live near one. Don't forget to leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and until next week, stay based.